We are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another installment of CavanKerry Press's virtual reading series. By now, this is our 31st virtual reading in an ongoing series of readings. I am the Marketing Communications Director at CavanKerry Press, Dimitri Reyes, and I'm welcoming you all to this wonderful, wonderful evening in celebration of not one, but two books. I do have my CavanKerry shirt on, and we are celebrating the launch of Karen Chase's History is Embarrassing. And we are also celebrating that pre-launch of Matthew Lippman's We Are All Sleeping with Our Sneakers On. This is going to be a great event where we're going to hear Karen's launch. We're going to hear a sneak peek of Matthew's words, and then we'll have a bit of an exchange between the both of them. Throughout the evening, if you're hearing beautiful lines or you want to sound off on something that you heard, please activate the chat and put that in the chat. All our authors get the chat at the end of the show, and they might not be able to see it now because they're in the throes of being authors, but they will get to see it later. Also, when we have that Q&A at the end, you can also put your questions in the chat, and I'll be sure to answer those as I'm moderating our conversation. Before we begin, I am going to turn it over to Tamara Kwesi-Coleman, who's going to give us a layout of our land acknowledgement.
Hi, all. My name is Tamara Kwesi-Coleman. I'm the social media coordinator for CavanKerry Press. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the latest in CavanKerry's series of virtual readings celebrating our new and forthcoming releases. Of course, today we are here to celebrate Karen Chase and the launch of History is Embarrassing. Before the reading begins, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey belongs to the Lenni Lenape people. We honor their history. We cannot function in our work as art activists, nor offer a safe space for all writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. Additionally, we join arts organizations across the country in celebrating National Women's History Month, an annual observance to highlight the contributions of women to events in history and contemporary society. We honor the often overlooked roles women have played both in society and as a whole, and as authors, in advancing the cause of gender equity and in pushing the publishing world to be more inclusive, thoughtful, and complete. We celebrate the writing of women, not just in March, but always. And now I'm going to hand it back to our marketing and communications director, Dimitri Reyes, to introduce tonight's readers.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Tamara. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was lovely. I appreciate all the applauses in the chat. I will beam you out until later, T. Thank you so much. Bye. Perfect. All right. And Karen, our star-studded woman of the evening. I am going to be beaming you back in a little while for now, but I'm going to turn it over for Matthew so we can start our introduction. I'll see you soon. Okay, Matthew Lippman is the author of 6 poetry collections. His latest book, We Are All Sleeping with Our Sneakers On, is published by Four Way Books. His previous collection, Mesmerizingly Sadly Beautiful in 2020, is published by Four Way Books. It was the recipient of the 2018 Levis Prize. Matthew also is the founder of College Essay Creatives, a consulting firm that assists college-bound students with their personal essays. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Lippman.
Thank you, Dimitri. I appreciate that. And want to thank Karen for inviting me and Dimitri and all the folks at CavanKerry for having me. I'm going to read a couple poems from my new book, We Are All Sleeping with Our Sneakers On, which has a release date of March 15th. And I might read one poem that's new from a collection in progress. So I'm going to begin with a poem. It's the first poem of the book. It's called As Natural as Finland, and it takes place at PS1, which is a museum in Queens, New York. If you walk into PS1, is this walled courtyard, and then that leads you into the main entrance. Very formidable walls. And I went there, it must have been early 2000s, and there was an artist named Pia Lindman who had set up a sauna in the middle of the courtyard. She's a Finnish artist, and was asking people if they wanted to take a sauna in the middle of Queens, New York, in the middle of a courtyard. And if you accepted, you were asked to get naked in the middle of that courtyard in the middle of Queens. So this is a poem about that. I accepted. As natural as Finland. A long time ago, I walked into the courtyard of PS1, the museum in Queens, and the artist Pia Lindman asked me to take off my clothes. She said, "Sign this," and I signed it. And I took my clothes off in the courtyard and got into the portable sauna she constructed with oak slabs and tarp. This was performance art or public art, or the art of the body meets the rubble of the city. I was round in the belly, and the woman next to me was naked too. The sauna was big enough for two, and we were in there with a red sheet preventing us from seeing each other naked. But we were in the courtyard naked, so we moved the sheet aside and said hello, our bodies saying hello. This was not asexual hello. This was not us wanting to have sex in the courtyard of PS1, known for its exhibitions of performance art. We were not exhibitionists or performers. We just wanted this to be Finland, the way people in Finland get naked and get in the sauna, like they take the dog out for a walk or fall down the stairs. This was Queens, but sometimes you have to stretch things out a bit. I don't remember the woman's name, but want so badly to be naked in the world right now. It hurts. It's 8 degrees outside and it hurts. And if there was a sauna in my driveway, I'd undress, fall down the stairs and hop in. I'd invite the neighbors and their families and the postwoman and the FedEx guy, and we'd all sit around sweating, and it'd be as natural as walking a dog in Finland. Not the courtyard of PS1, where everything was always a little too much about the mind anyway, and not enough about the dry, naked flesh, bodies, lots of bodies sitting together at the round table of sitting together. I think I wrote that poem during COVID when we were all not together. Here's a poem about my daughter Eliana. It's called "This Will Destroy You." My dog is chewing a cord. Hold on. This Will Destroy You is a band, and they play a lot of heavy guitar, moody, ambient music. This poem arose from that, and watching my daughter grow up. Her name is Eliana, and this is for her. My daughter does this thing. It's this cool thing. It's the thing that young people do when they figure out they no longer need you, belong to you, want anything to do with you. She does this thing where she cooks up some turkey bacon, makes up a bowl of berries, some toast, maybe a bagel, hauls it all over to the window seat, sits with a book, The Pearl Thief. Definitely not Harry Potter. She hates Harry Potter. Reading and eating, all the spring air and light barreling into her like the guitar part from a "This Will Destroy You" song. Except there is no destruction anywhere to be found. There's no decay or rot or horror. There is only the cat trying to get at her meat because he's hungry. He's always hungry. And if a bird flew into the house through the open window, he'd tear it to shreds, and everyone would get hysterical and start to scream like the great wrath of God had finally come to pass. But before he can get his claws into the slab, my daughter, the one who is all alone in her private spot, picks him up and places him quietly at another window where he can smell the blood of the world through the screen. And she goes back to her window with her water and her breakfast, and is very much the person she is becoming in solitude, and how beautiful it is. Remember how beautiful it was when you discovered solitude, thought about it, thought, hey, this is kind of nice. I like this. And then tried to get as much of it as possible, even when the world was pushing you to destroy yourself with other people. This is a poem about being a poet and being a father, and it's called Fuck Poems. Because at the end of the day, when you're a dad, nothing else really matters. Certainly not poetry or the poetry business. And that's kind of what this is about. Fuck poems. At 4 a.m., I got a rejection note from a literary journal. They said, "Get out of here with your crazy poems." Rejections don't bother me, but this one bothered me. Not because it was from a particular magazine or editor. The rejection was like the core of a rotten orange being extracted from a different time zone. When I read the rejection, I did not feel relevant anymore. And in my mind, this is why the literary journal did not want to publish my poems. In my mind, the poems must not have been short enough, Jewish enough, black enough, white enough, LGBTQ enough, too cis male enough, not Prince enough, or open-hearted enough, or too open-hearted enough, not love enough, or love in the wrong way enough. Whatever it was that made the editors hit the reject button was not of my concern, though. What was of my concern was why I was up at 4 in the morning in the first place. My 11-year-old had vomited earlier and after eating peanuts, and for a second we wondered if she would stop breathing. She did not stop breathing, but she was worried about having her larynx close up on her. She couldn't sleep enough. We lied in bed together, not sleeping enough. "Hold my hand," she said. "Can I put my head on your shoulder?" she said. Then she would sit up and shake from her fear. A real shaking, the kind you can't make up. The kind your body just does when everything is out of sorts and the ego does not matter. "Will my throat close up?" she asked. "Will the sky close up?" she asked. "Will I close up?" she asked. And there were not enough words that I could find to help. There were not enough words to string together in little magical tightropes to help her from her body, to quiet her body from thinking it would stop breathing. Peter Tosh. Peter Tosh was he was a big voice when I was a young man, finding my way through the world. And this poem is about Peter Tosh. For those of you who don't know Peter Tosh is, he's a reggae musician, and he used to play guitar with Bob Marley and the Wailers. I believe he was a Wailer. This morning, when you woke up, you needed Peter Tosh. Sometimes it takes 30 years to listen to Peter Tosh. You wake up one morning singing, "I said I am that I am, I am, I am, I am." It comes out of nowhere, like the stars come out of nowhere, and you must want to be what you are. The last time you remember being what you were listening to Peter Tosh on a Greyhound bus in Ohio. There was a woman in Ohio. There is always a woman in Ohio. You were everything that you were. The Fireflies told you that. It took 8 years or 8 hours to get to Cleveland. You listened to Peter Tosh the whole trip. You had to flip the tape and the Walkman over and over, like the Fireflies went over and over to tell you something. They were there to tell you how beautiful you were. You did not need the woman in Ohio. You needed Peter Tosh. This morning, when you woke up, you needed Peter Tosh. Maybe it's the long, endless bus ride of being stuck inside. Maybe it's the endless amount of time that has spread out before you in timelessness. That's what Peter Tosh is, timelessness. And you are getting in touch with timelessness because it takes a long time to get in touch with timelessness. And I will read, so we can get to Karen, one more poem called "A Sentimental Shot at Humanity." It's a little long, not that long. And I tend to embrace popular culture and music and try and I'm influenced by it all the time. I write with music all the time, so it gets into my poems. And the this poem references a song called Laundry Room, which is by the Avett Brothers, and came out, I don't know, 2008, 2009. A sentimental shot at humanity. Karen, she's a friend of mine. Karen, I don't know why I address you in this moment. Perhaps it's because you are in Vermont and I used to summer camp there when I was as whole of a lad as a lad could be, with all of those trees and silences creating prairies in my blood. It's March and my children are growing up. The Avett Brothers' song Laundry Room is on the Spotify, and it occurs to me that all I have been doing for 18 years is laundry. The white load, the colored load, the load of bills and anxiety and iced tea, and late nights with the kids when they couldn't fall asleep and were throwing up bile and aspartame and nightmares. But today, in March, I turned 58, and the children are slowly and quickly loading up the car and taking off. The Avett Brothers have a song called I and Love and You. They sing, Brooklyn, Brooklyn, take me in. A long time ago, I thought Brooklyn was France, and then it took me in, and I made it my home. We birthed our first child there, although I did no birthing of any kind, but I sure as shit held her up to the Cobble Hill streetlights when she was born, said, look at us now, and here we are, the way time is a motherfucker. And I don't even miss myself from back then. The other night, Michael said, what's going on? I said, I am learning how to pay attention. He said, huh? Because it made sense to say. We can say 1,000 things to one another, Karen, and sometimes all someone needs to utter is, huh? And the cosmos just goes tumbling out and keeps on tumbling. I miss you, Karen, and that's really why I address you in this poem, and everything makes me cry. Can we say that in a poem? What if Major Jackson read this poem, or Jory Graham, or dead Gerald Stern? Would they think it was a sentimental shot at humanity? Who cares anymore? I'm 58 and all I have is a good heart. The Avett Brothers know, and right now I like that. I know if they read this poem, we drink whiskey and get out the mandolins to make some noise. That's why, Karen, I address you in this poem. We get out the mandolin to always make some noise, and my daughter, at this exact moment, is upstairs doing her own load of soiled sheets. It's hers, and I have no more quarters. The truth is, I could write this poem forever, just keep it going. That's my talent. But it's probably time to stop and whisper Brooklyn into the ears of my iced tea as homage to some faraway place that let me do the family laundry in laundromats owned by people named Lucy and Franklin, people who used to bend down with me, get close to the hot dryer, and sing to the tumbling clothes, I and Love and You. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your listening.
Matthew, what an ending poem, sir. What an
Thank you,
ending
Dimitri.
poem. I loved it. Thank you so much from beginning to end. All right, so we'll be beaming you out right now, and we'll be beaming you back in for the Q&A. Folks, we are all sleeping with our sneakers on. We've all done it once before. You're going to have something to think of with this book. Uh, definitely think about that. Four-way books. All right, see you soon, Matthew.
Thank
Okay, now for our reader of this evening, I'm welcoming Karen Chase. Karen, I'm going to ask you to unmute, but before you speak, I am going to read your bio for everyone if they don't know. Karen Chase is the author of 2 collections of poems, Casimir Square and Bear, as well as Jamali Kamali, a book-length homoerotic. Give me 1 second, because with that screen share, I should have the bio memorized, but I don't, so I had to switch my screen for a second. Okay, I'll start over. Karen Chase is the author of 2 collections of poems, Casimir Square and Bear, as well as Jamali Kamali, a book-length homoerotic poem that takes place in Mughal, India. Her award-winning book, Land of Stone, tells a story of her work with a silent young man in a psychiatric hospital where she was the hospital poet. Her childhood bout with polio sparked her memoir, Polio Boulevard, as well as FDR on his houseboat, the Larukulog, 1924 to 1926. She and her husband live in Western Massachusetts. You can visit her online at www.karenchase.com. And this book is a culmination of a lot what you just heard in her bio. And I am very pleased and honored to welcome Karen Chase.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here. And thank you all for coming. And Matthew, thank you for reading your poems. That was such a sheer delight. I've loved your poems for years and years. And I like that the last poem was to Karen, even though it wasn't me. But I took it as it was for me. CavanKerry. I've been with CavanKerry from the beginning, and I thank you all so much for the work you've done on this book, and I have so much admiration for the press, the way it was started and the way it's evolved. It's a beautiful thing. So I want to talk about a recent essay in this book called Jamali Kamali, Airborne in History. In 2004, I went to Delhi, to India, for a month-long writing residency. And while I was there, I went there with no idea of what I was going to write. Actually, I didn't even really care if I was going to write. I just wanted to go be there for a month. But one day after I was there for just a couple of days, all the residents were taken in a bus to a park in the middle of the city. And we were led through old ruins and up hills and over brush, passing this big river full of garbage. It was sights I had never seen before. But we ended up on a plateau, a high plateau, where the ruins had been recently restored and were just being opened to the public. And then there was a sign that said, "This is the Jamali Kamali Mosque and Tomb." Jamali was a 16th century Sufi court poet. Kamali's identity is unknown. And then we were taken into this little exquisite tomb. There were 2 marble graves. And the conservator said to us, "This is Jamali's grave. He was a 16th century Sufi court poet. And this is Kamali's grave. His identity is unknown." No, that's not what he said. He said he was Jamali's gay lover. And it was shocking because I had just read the sign 2 minutes before where there was no information about him. So I said, "What?" He said, "We would never have an official sign in India saying that someone was homosexual." Anyway, I went back to my room, sat at my desk, and I just started writing as if I were Jamali, speaking to Kamali. And for the next year and a half, I wrote a book-length poem about these 2 men. So now I want to read a little bit from this essay. Many people have asked, why did you write this book? I'm not a man, I'm not gay, I'm not Indian, I'm not Muslim, I'm not a Mughal scholar, I'm not an art historian, I'm a straight, white, American, Jewish, 21st century woman, and I'm not even young. I've crossed so many lines here: gender, sexual orientation, time, hemisphere. So often writers are advised to write what you know. I did the opposite. Opening oneself to the unknown paves the way for a large exploration rather than the up-close, confining details of what I know. The unknown is a wider plane. For me, it is. A big, flat, open space where options abound. The endless screen makes possible a roomier grasp of universals like love, death, separation. It makes possible what is known by all, rather than the smallness of, quote, what I know. There is largesse. You know, just reading this right after hearing Matthew's poems written about what he knows, there's a lot to talk about, but we're not going to talk about it here. So I went, now I'm skipping ahead in the essay. I went back to India in 2011 to celebrate the publication of Jamali Kamali, A Tale of Passion in Mughal India, bringing the book to the Jaipur Literary Festival. Bipin Shah, the publisher, had arranged the Delhi launch beforehand. As I read from the book, Jamali's and Kamali's voices filled the room. Afterwards, the moderator, a well-known cultural figure, opened a discussion by attacking me. I was shocked and surprised that he had been chosen to moderate the evening and suspect that Mr. Shah was as well. You distort history by fictionalizing it, he said. Then I talked about the place and power of the imagination. The eloquent audience broke out into intense but polite arguing, making for a thought-provoking evening. To me, at that point, it was clear that fact and fiction were two separate entities. I wasn't distorting history. I was inspired by a snippet of history to make up my own story and saw no conflict. It's not as if my fiction would alter the historical record. Ha is not in the essay. That's what I thought until a few years ago. I looked up my Jamali Kamali book title on the web to see how it was faring and found myself on a travel portal to Delhi. I was reading about the historical monument, the Jamali Kamali Mosque and Tomb, which subway to take for your visit. It opens at sunrise, closes at sunset, Thai restaurant nearby, when I landed on something unexpected. Jamali Kamali offers a fine piece of structural design and a fascinating story behind it. After his death in 1535, Jamali was buried in his tomb alongside Kamali. Very few are aware that both these men were deeply in love with each other. In Jamali's poetic works, you can find passionate words and phrases describing his immense love for Kamali, such as, quote, "On the map of your body, there is nowhere I would not travel," unquote. The fascinating story this article was referring to behind the monument is a fiction. It comes from my imagined poem, not from historical facts. Jamali did not write the line quoted above. I did. The webpage relates a few details about Jamali's life as if they are facts, but the details are taken from my invented poem. And I'm going to skip now to the end of the essay. Salman Rushdie said, quote, "Sometimes legends make reality and become more useful than the facts," unquote. And Jamali and Kamali, thanks to the impure way history forms itself, move deeper into the Indian story, history coming alive through art. So after I wrote that long poem, long tale of these two men, which was as far from everything I am that I could imagine, the next thing I wrote was what was closest to me. And I think I was sent to write what I know most deeply and clearly. And that is, when I was a child, when I was 10 years old, right before the Salk vaccine was discovered, I got polio. I had a bad case of polio, and I was out of school for a number of years. And it was very formative. So this is from a little snippet from an essay about that. "My mother and I are together, traveling fast in an ambulance. Her hazel eyes are open wide, her face tight. Feverish, I am looking out the window. A breeze moves the highest limbs of a maple. A bird parts the air. I'm burning up. When we zoom past school, I look at the whizzing brick wall and think book report," which I was supposed to give that day, "and then I don't think anything. The ambulance pulls up to a hospital. Men slide me fast out the back of it. My father, who has followed the ambulance in our car, is standing with my mother. They're like large guards, unmoving. The men slide me around on the ambulance stretcher. My body is frozen. The earth, earthquake-like, is shaking. Karen," my father tells me later, "your mother's hair turned white that year. Soon, hot and tiny, I'm swimming in a sea. There is water and me and me swimming hard as I can in a blackening bigness. My solid parents are an enlarging wooden raft. I am attached to something crazy, some crazy transportation. The ambulance stretcher? No. The rush of the iron lung, which helps me breathe. The iron lung is an ivory enameled metal tube with chrome portholes and rests steady on the wooden ward floor. All my limbs are concealed, my head separated from the rest of me on a slanted headrest sticks out. I cannot move my head or anything at all. The iron lung is my magic boat, a boat for one, a rhythm boat, in, out, in, out. The portholes suggest foreign places. My body is inside the iron lung, but my mind is outside. I'm traveling. Somehow I wanted to read these two pieces together of writing from your imagination, just totally making something up. And then something so close. And when I pick the piece to read, the way it ends, I'm traveling. I get, maybe that's why I tend to travel in my mind rather than look at what I know. Anyway, thanks a lot. I think I'm done.
Wow, Karen, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being so giving, and giving us backgrounds on what you were reading as well. When we are, hold on, I'm trying to get my spotlights. I'm like all over the place today. I'm trying add spotlight. I was replacing spotlights. Okay. It's really great when we get to this stage in the book. I guess the book age process that it's actually out here, because when we're all reading it as CavanKerry Press editors, we're always just trying to infer what's going on in the background of the author's mind. So to actually have the author in front of us and give us some of the backgrounds on how these things came to fruition, it's really great. Again, thank you so much for both of you for being here. And for everyone that's going to be listening in the chat, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat. Both myself and our director have been kicking around some questions back and forth we wanted to ask, and then we'll start adding questions from the chat as well. So please do that. I first wanted to start, and this is the selfish editor in me and also the poet that just spent time with Matthew's book today. I always love hearing about the process of when a book came to fruition, when it started. So can you talk about both of you? If you could talk about how your book started and when did you have these collections of pieces that could go together and say, oh my God, this is my next collection. Can we talk a little bit about that magic and what it was like? Maybe we'll start with you first, Matthew.
There's something mysterious and arbitrary about it. You know, I never really have an idea about what a collection is going to be until recently, before it becomes what it is. So a lot of the poems that sort of stood out in like a 2-year period in which I was writing were thematically connected. You know, it was COVID, and I was writing poems after the George Floyd murder, and issues of race and identity, and then being deeply involved in an area of or a time of parenting that felt very resonant. So those three things were just in the ether, and I was writing about them. And when I started to put the book together, I was like, okay, I like my books in 3 sections, and and these 3 things are thematically rich. So I'm just gonna see what the best of it all is, and see what comes of it. And that's how the book got put together, was constructed.
That's awesome. It's cool how the creation comes in waves, and for certain times in our life, we're thinking about certain obsession engines that keep hanging around. And it's not until we look at a bunch of work on a page we could start making those connections, right? Because even
Yeah.
through your sections, um, it's funny because when I read your book, I knew that it was broken up into sections, but that was more like on a subconscious level, and I was kind of reading it straight through, and there
Uh-huh.
were connections and ties to make from section to section. So it's really cool that even though we can write things that feel like they exist in their own thematic bubble, how they kind of still intersect with one another.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really cool. Thank you, Matthew. What about you, Karen?
Um, hmm. You know, I, I don't normally write essays. I mean, I write an essay every rare once in a while. So I had some old essays, but not enough for a book.
Mm,
And then I ended up that made me want to write some new essays. So, so I did. That's one thing. The other thing is that there are two essays in the book about a bear poaching operation that took place in New England and was kind of centered in the Berkshires where I live. And I had learned to shoot. I interviewed a lot of the bad guys and a lot of the good guys. And I thought the only way I'll ever be able to write about these people is if I learned to shoot, because they were all hunters. And so I learned to shoot, and I wrote an essay about that. But I wrote that quite a long time ago. And guns mean something very different to me today than they did a decade ago. And particularly with this book, the theme of it being history is embarrassing. Like, guns are embarrassing. I mean, guns in America are embarrassing. And so I was able to take that essay and to write an epilogue, which felt very important to me. So it's a combination of things, some
Yeah, it's I mean, with a title like that, it seems almost a parody of history, right? But it's also for face value, taking that quote for what it is, history is embarrassing. It's kind of you're diving into a book like this in a way where all of the lyric essays that you have there are going to be subjective to truth, right? And that's something that Gabriel Cleveland, our director, wrote in about with a question, and this is to you, Karen. So, in that conversation of what you just said, and thank you for that, one of the themes I found persistent through your collection is how subjective truth is, how we all knowingly and unknowingly affect reality, and the sometimes marvelous, sometimes monstrous ways that words can be used to affect the world we live in. So, in this modern age of misinformation, can you talk a bit about the responsibility that we have as writers, that we have to consider in the way we influence the world? Do you want me to summarize that, or did you get that, Karen?
You could summarize it.
Sure. So, in the modern age of misinformation, what is our responsibility as authors that when we put a book into the world, we're going to influence people?
What's our responsibility? Well, it's what drives us. I mean, what drives us is to write what feels most truthful. To express that, whether you express it in a funny way, a frightening way, but authenticity, genuineness. I mean, that I feel very driven by that. So as far as responsibility is concerned, that's the most I can do. Does that answer that?
Yeah, yeah. To summarize the summary of what you said, I guess it's kind of like the authenticity is just going to lead the truth, right? And your authenticity will show on the page, and we're hoping that our audience sees that and they get
Yeah,
to
it's the
engage with it.
best you can do.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. And that's actually going to go into a little bit of a question I usually ask at the end. And I feel like we're going to get back around to the authenticity talk. So we'll see if it comes up again. Thank you, Karen. Matthew, I guess the same question for you, because there's a lot of, just being unbrazenly truthful in yourself and vulnerable and authentic in your collections, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what's the truth and authenticity in your book, and the social responsibility of that?
Um, yeah. I have no idea. I think that when I mean, so what's the truth when anyone sits down to listen to a piece of music or gets up to dance to a piece of music or lets music be the great influencer and spirit of a moment? I think in my writing, that's what I'm going for. And so, however it plays itself out, it plays itself out. I don't think I'm smart enough or wise enough or intuitive enough to be any kind of barometer for anything socially um, relevant in terms of what's happening in the culture. I just want people to feel good,
Mm,
when they read something that I write. And I literally I want them to feel good in their body,
right.
because I feel like poetry's just that some words on the page, and it's if it can have an effect, little, big, nothing, on somebody's frame and muscle and make them cry or whatever, then I feel like I've done a sweet thing in a small moment. And you're a poet, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think one of the beautiful things about being a poet is we get to stretch and exaggerate. And Karen's a poet. We get to exaggerate and mess around with words and make up stuff. And, as a way of getting to something truthful and authentic. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
I think,
that's, yeah,
yeah, I like that when poets compare poetry to music, because there's a lot that's happening between both of those sonically, right? Like, even if you're reading poetry on a subconscious level, you're kind of hearing it, whether it's your voice or whether it's someone else's voice.
right. Yeah.
Um, and I wouldn't call you unintelligent, bro. You got 6 books in the pocket. So, that
No, but
that does
I'm
count for
not.
something. Yeah.
I don't think it has anything to do with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, yeah. I
Yeah.
just wish I was like a guy who played guitar in a studio making some songs, you
Yeah,
know?
well, I mean, honestly, a lot of the things that I say was I was a failed musician, so I became a
Yeah,
poet, so I could still be on stage, right?
right. Yeah.
So yeah, there's totally something there, and I like that idea of still like thinking about authenticity in different ways, right? So Karen, you're coming to authenticity in the way of it's your truth that you're speaking into existence, and then with Matthew, you're feeling the work in the body, right? And I think a lot of poets feel the work in the body, and they try to translate that. Matthew, I'll go to
Well,
you with a question. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
I don't, I don't actually feel that what I'm saying and Matthew is saying is is particularly different.
Oh, okay.
I don't. We're using different words to express, I think, the same thing.
Hmm.
Like something is driving you to put down these words, and they're the words that are most genuine to you at that moment, and you hope they'll hit someone and make them feel something, make them feel something, like
Agreed.
make
Yeah.
them feel good, make them cry, make them think. you know i I just think we were expressing very similar things in a different way. That's how I was hearing it.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure, for sure. I could see that also. I was just talking about that. We were really tackling truth in a different way, and I would say more of a heady way with you, Karen, that does then transfer into the body because you know the muses overtake you and that's what you feel like writing. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, yeah, Matthew, I was going to talk about music with you for a sec because you play with music in your work, in terms of craft and literally. So I was wondering when you're actually playing to music. Well, actually, first, Karen, when you are writing, do you write to music or is this something you do in silence?
Silence.
Really? Okay. Do you find music distracting if you're writing?
Yeah, but as you
Okay.
know, I paint and
Uh-huh.
have music. I would never paint without music on.
Okay, so it's kind of depending on the discipline here, right? So that's great, Matthew. So I want to know about that. Like sometimes people can't split their brain between the music brain and the poetry brain. So how do you reconcile that when you're creating art and you're actively listening to music?
I have no idea. I've been listening to music for as long as I've been writing, which is since I was probably 4 years old. I think music is it just kind of helps me open up um and 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 get inspired or find a groove or it it's I'm listening to music all the time anyway, so it's this great um river of sounds that somehow allow me to get a poem started or get inside a poem while I'm in the middle of it or inform an ending, or it's just wickedly inspirational all the time. It's like my muse.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love it. I love us. We're chasing muses this evening.
Yeah, right.
If I could title our
Painting.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Karen, so in your writing then, if it's not music, if music is helping you paint, so what opens you up in your work when you were sitting to write down these essays? Was it just thought alone
Well,
or
it's hard. The essays, it's hard to answer that because I've spent my writing life not writing essays.
uh-huh.
Poems are come so much more naturally to me. Um, so it's easier for me to answer that question about poems.
Okay.
Um, and I don't know. But it's easier for me to answer the question, but like, I don't know. I don't know.
So Karen, what's your writing setup then? Do you just are you the scribble the old school scribble on napkins when you get an idea thing, or do you have a
Yeah.
process,
Um,
a time?
yeah, yeah. Just go sit down at the computer and see what happens.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's the process.
So you're one of
Just
those
sit
old
there.
school start with a blank page.
Yeah, the blank
Whoa.
page. Totally blank page.
Oh
So,
man.
I
Okay.
mean, though sometimes, I mean, there are times when something will happen during the day and I just start thinking of a poem starts to form and then I'll go to my computer and start putting things down. But then I do like 1,000 drafts,
Mhm.
I go as far afield as I can go. And then,
So 1,000 drafts, are those additions, or you already start cutting it up by like the second or the third draft, or does it depend?
well, I don't literally mean 1,000 drafts, but I literally mean 20 drafts.
That's still a lot, Karen.
Yeah,
There are a lot of drafts.
but by draft, it might be changing 2 words.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's totally fine. So yeah, I mean, what are words, right? We're poets. I think Matthew, you saying it earlier, like, words are just words, right? They mean something, but we mix them around in certain ways. So yeah, okay, like even 20 sessions, that's you putting in a lot of work to a piece. But that's great, and that just goes to show that if there are any emerging writers that are that are listening to this after the fact, how much goes into a piece, and then how much goes into a book when there's a bunch of pieces in there. I know for the essays, it's a bit hard for you to kind of pinpoint what you're doing in the process of those because these essays span like your entire career almost, and they've kind of built upon themselves, which I think is very fascinating. And we're gonna get to that too, because I do have a question for that. I did want to go back to Matthew for a second, then Karen will bounce back to you. So Matthew, the last music question we had was in reference to Peter Tosh, and you referenced getting in touch with timelessness. So Gabriel appreciates how many of the details in your writing zero in on specific moments, often intimate, small, and quiet. Throughout your writing, it is clear that you are putting that lesson to great use. So for the rest of us, how do you practice that close attention and render a beautiful observation?
I think that the smallest things are the most generous things for a reader and for me as a writer. So the more details, I believe I'm answering the question. The more details that I can get into a poem, the richer it will be. And I don't know, I just find that little beautiful things are happening all the time. Um and I have been as a person in the world trying to be as present as I can be in every moment and to pay attention to those things and those interactions that are happening in the moments that I'm trying to be present in. So I feel like the world just hums and resonates um, um, softer and softer the more that I pay attention, and then I steal those things and I plop them in my poems because it's all just about stealing.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, you said some profound things. Like the universe hums a bit quieter the more you pay attention. Looking at those small moments and being more present. I do see that, and I don't know if this is just generally that's happening. Some people could attribute it to COVID and making our lives slow down a little bit, but I do see that we're all starting to just slow down and think a bit more about things and like kind of almost even metacognitively seeing things outside ourselves for what it is and taking those moments, which I think is super important. Do you think it came from our COVID times? Did you feel like it just came from time and you writing and just you experiencing things? And I think I'm gonna ask both of you that because Karen, I would be remiss to say if your essays aren't you thinking about those small moments and interacting with people in very present ways. So oh, I guess the summary of that question is when did you all start finding that real presence of just being in the moment and how that attributed to you writing stuff?
Karen, hit it. Go for it.
When did I could you say it again?
Sure, yeah. When did you find that presence while you were writing to really be in those moments while you were experiencing those things that ended up affecting your writing?
But when it, whenever I'm writing, that's what writing isn't that what writing is?
I mean, I don't know, you tell me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know how to answer it because that seems to me that that's what sitting down and looking at the blank screen is that it requires you to go inside for for stuff that you want to say, that you want to say, that you want to be heard, that feels urgent, that feels beautiful, that feels horrifying. It's the urgent stuff that's on the blank screen that calls me to start writing any one day or another. I don't know if that answers you, but
I mean, that was beautiful. That's what I was looking for. That was great. Matthew, any response?
I think I started paying attention in a different way, in my 30s. I'm 58 years old, so I just when I in my 30s, I just started figuring out what it meant to be a person in the world, and I still haven't figured it out. I hope I never do. But one piece of it was just kind of slowing down and looking around quietly and embracing solitude and stillness. And so yeah, that and then that of course just became integrated into everything I did, whether I was cooking, tofu and broccoli, or taking my kid to the stream, or whatever it was.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So we're gonna end on this last question, and then if Matthew, if you want to come into this last question because it's geared towards Karen, we can have a bit of a dialogue before we go. So Karen, I was very captivated in the Jamali Kamali essay when you say something along the lines of, so many people advise authors write what you know, and I did the opposite. Writing what you know could be really helpful in the beginning, especially for an early career writer. But at some point, we start writing our way to different discoveries. And you have had your first poetry book with us and have had a long career of writing since then. So, can you talk a little bit about that earlier Karen Chase that first published with us and who you are as a writer now?
Well, I feel kind of like exactly the same.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I'm sorry to say that, but
Yeah.
it's that urgency that I was mentioning before.
Hmm.
It's an urgency because you feel or see something, and it doesn't feel like it's changed.
That's wonderful. I mean, Karen, don't think of that as a slight to yourself because it's like
I
you've
don't.
always
I
you've always
don't.
had
I'm
that.
just sorry I couldn't answer your
No.
question better.
Yeah, no, that's perfect because what it's telling me is that it's never left you. You know, that pursuit and that wonder and that wanting to create. Like it's it's a gem that's where you just started. So that's a perfect
So
answer.
far so good. What can I say?
Yeah. Matthew, what about you? Any comments?
Just that on some level, I agree with Karen completely. Like when I was became conscious around 13, I would lay in my bed and this was before digital music, and I would put on side one of Dark Side of the Moon and throw my headphones on, and I'd just write these terrible poems to
Yeah.
love and whatever, and I'd write all night long. That desire, that need. And I still do the same thing. I'm 59 years old, and I will put on I'm listening to Penguin Cafe now,
Okay.
right? Right, Penguin Cafe, and I will just write all that. But the thing that's different is, and I'm sure Karen, well, I don't know, I'm sure she feels similarly, is the craft piece, the craft element. Like I have a command now of the craft of writing that I didn't have when I was 16. But the
Hmm.
impulse right, that primal thing, it's exactly the same as it was 100 years ago.
Yeah. I love to hear it. I love to hear that nothing's changed, Matthew. So you're still putting on music and writing those poems. And I love that nothing has changed, Karen, and you've just been in your writing pursuits. Like if nothing is going to change, that's one thing that shouldn't change. And it's our
Right.
love
No,
for the
and
art.
I have
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah.
I'm an elder, and and it's a great, I mean, it's a great gift
Mm,
at any time in your life, but it's really good now.
yeah, surely. Oh my gosh.
You know, I was
What a thing
seeing,
to look forward to.
I was listening to, I'm sorry to interrupt. There was this clip of an interview. Harry Reasoner from 60 Minutes was interviewing Miles Davis, and Reasoner
Oh.
said to Miles Davis, if you never recorded another song, put out another album, would you still play music? And Miles was like, "What? Well, that's a stupid question. Of course, I would still play music." He said, "I'm playing music right now while we're having this conversation in his
Mm,
head, right? It's
it never leaves.
I'm not pairing myself with Miles Davis, but the sentiment is
Yeah,
is what I'm connecting to. So
right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, in short, if anyone at home has gotten anything throughout this whole conversation, if you're an artist, the arting never stops.
correct.
It's just perpetually in your mind, it's perpetually in the body.
Yep.
Oh man, that was great. Again, everyone, please raise your glasses and give applause to Karen Chase for her new book, History is Embarrassing, now available from CavanKerry Press, and Matthew Lippman, his book is available as of March 15th and is available for pre-order. Thank you so much for this,
Thank
everyone.
you.
I'm going to ask everyone to unmute so you could come on and say your goodbyes.
Thank you, Dimitri. That was great. I appreciate
Oh,
you very
thank you.
much.
Thank you so much, Matthew. It was great having you all.
Thank you, Karen. You're
Yeah,
the best.
thank you, Matthew.